I try to keep my videos somewhat short. Sometimes there are stories that it just takes a little bit more. There's a lot of information and evidence, and it takes a little bit longer to tell the story. And this is one of those stories. I couldn't just do this cut and dry story about this man and woman and this murder, because there were so many different little bits and pieces that fit together like a puzzle that all kind of came together in this story. And so it is somewhat longer, and I just wanted to let people know that I thought about doing it in 2 parts, but I really just wanted to keep the momentum of the story going. I also want everyone to keep in mind as I'm beginning this story that it does take some twists and turns. Just like the roadways across Pine Mountain that's talked about in this story, it's very twisty and it takes some very sharp curves and goes into some different directions. And I will talk about corruption in the police department that turns out as I get into this story, and more people who are later indicted. Keeping with the Letcher County area, I remembered this story. This was from 2014. Now, this actually took place in 2012. Wife agrees to life in prison for helping her lover kill her husband. This is from the Mountain Eagle, a newspaper from Letcher County, Kentucky. In pleading guilty earlier this week to her role in the brutal slaying of her husband, a Millstone woman will avoid the death penalty and receive life in prison if she follows through on her promise to testify against her lover and another man who were also charged in this case. Stephanie Jones Fleming, 32, must give a recorded sworn statement regarding the murder of her husband, Drad Fleming. And she has to testify in the 2 separate trials set against her lover, 34-year-old James Ray Maggard, and another suspect, 26-year-old Austin Eisen of Perk Creek in Whitesburg. Letcher County Commonwealth Attorney Edison G. Banks II said he consulted with Mr. Fleming's family and the Letcher County Sheriff's Department before an offer was made to Miss Fleming for a life sentence that would leave her eligible for parole in 18 years. Our quest has always been to uncover the truth and get justice for the murder of Drad Fleming, and to see those responsible for his murder held accountable. We have a tremendous strive in achieving that goal. This is called Killing in Coal Country. This article was written in July of 2012. Whitesburg, Kentucky. The last good person to see Drad Fleming that Wednesday evening was his stepfather, who pointed him to a parking place outside the Neon Church of Christ, where his favorite uncle was. There was a funeral for his uncle. But Mr. Fleming never showed up at the visitation. Now, see, this is what I remembered about this. I remembered that there was a funeral and the family was all there at this church waiting for him to come, and he never showed up. So they started looking for him after a while. But after a while, someone started trying to get in touch with him. His cell phone rung unanswered. His brand new red Silverado pickup was nowhere to be seen. And when they got to the cemetery for the uncle's burial, his mother, Kathy Bentley, turned to her younger son and said, her younger son, Afton, she said, "You've got to take me home. Something's wrong. I can't find your brother." She just had this mother's instinct, this sense of dread that she just knew something was not right about her son not being there at this funeral, at the church or at the cemetery. They started a search for him, and the news traveled quickly. All the people in the community heard about him, heard about his family was searching for him. The men and the people that worked for the Cumberland River Coal Company coal mine, where he worked as a roof bolter, they all wondered what's going on. Nobody could get a hold of him. They came out to help search. It wasn't until Saturday, June the 23rd, that the Letcher County Sheriff's deputies found his burned truck resting 80 feet down an embankment on Black Mountain. There was a charred human body inside the truck. On July the 14th, a grand jury met to hear evidence against Mr. Fleming's wife, Stephanie Jones Fleming, 30, and James Ray Maggard, 33, a man who was believed to be her lover, in connection with the murder of Drad Fleming. The community, the Letcher County, Whitesburg community, it's a coal mining community. Everybody who's familiar with eastern Kentucky knows the history of coal, but Letcher County in particular. Jenkins even has a sign up, as you saw in the previous video that I did about the murder of Michael Lowe from the Birdine area in Letcher County. They have a sign that says Jenkins, the town built on coal. I mean, it's just a known fact. So all these coal miners, you know, they are brothers, and they get together and they talk, and they were, you know, something's not right here. Sheriff Danny Webb said that the county has had 2 or 3 murders a year at most. Well, so far I have done Angela Roberts, her daughter Trish Dethridge, Lois Trent, Michael Lowe, this man, Drad Fleming, not to mention a couple of code cases that I'm still working on, and cases that go back as far as the 1980s. Sheriff Danny Webb, now he's no longer the sheriff, this was back in 2012, said that the county has maybe 2 or 3 murders a year, and most of them are linked to the drug trade or to domestic violence. Under Kentucky law, Miss Fleming and Mr. Maggard, who were arrested shortly after the body was found, remain in the Letcher County Jail, could face the death penalty. For Mr. Maggard, it would be first-degree murder and arson. And for Miss Fleming, because of a prior conviction, she is considered a persistent felony offender. It would be complicity to murder. The grand jury is expected to report its decision. Now, this was written like a month after the murder took place. Lieutenant Brian Dameron with the Sheriff's Department said that he became suspicious of Mrs. Fleming, who was convicted in 2011 of food stamp fraud, seemed less concerned about her husband's disappearance. When the family, including his ex-wife, filed a missing persons report, Mrs. Fleming was not even with them. And when police went to question her, she offered different versions of what she thought happened. First of all, she said that she picked Mr. Maggard up on Pine Mountain, and this was close to where the body was found. It seemed very odd, said Lieutenant Dameron. I really felt that something was not right, and that she knew more than she was saying. So, Drad Fleming went missing on the night of June 20th, 2012. He was seen looking for a place to park at this church in Neon so he could attend the funeral of his uncle who had been killed in an ATV accident. Mr. Fleming was lured by Mrs. Fleming back home. Before he ever even went into the church for this funeral, she must have called him and told him to come back home. Something was going on at the house. She wanted him to come back home right away. And when he got back to his house, they ambushed him. On June 23rd, while searchers still combed the area looking for Drad Fleming, Searchers went out on ATVs, four-wheelers, and on foot, and even by helicopter, searching the area. Mr. Maggard walked into the sheriff's office in Whitesburg and said that he had killed Drad Fleming, but that it was an accident. He told the deputies that he was walking across Pine Mountain when Mr. Fleming drove up. He said Mr. Fleming stopped his truck and that the two of them had a verbal altercation that later became physical. He said Mr. Fleming swung a baseball bat at him and that he, Mr. Maggard, grabbed the bat and hit Mr. Fleming. He said that he then passed out. He says that when he awoke, that he put Mr. Fleming's body in the truck and drove up Black Mountain. According to Lieutenant Dameron, he told him that he felt very sick. He said he exited the vehicle and the vehicle rolled over the hill, and that was his story. Now, how the vehicle caught on fire. But at a preliminary hearing on June the 28th, Lieutenant Dameron cited evidence that was completely different. Lieutenant Dameron said that the truck, which was burned to the point that it was nothing but metal, would had to have gone over a 5-foot berm in order to roll down this hill. He said, adding that the body found in the car was so badly burned that they had to do DNA to even identify him. There was nothing left but charred remains. It took 4 to 6 months in order to get the DNA. The truck's gas tank was open, and investigators said that an accelerant had probably been used to cause the fire. And since the tank was open, the fire was, it spread quicker. Video cameras at a nearby mine captured the truck turning up the road and Mr. Maggard walking down the road an hour and a half later. Lieutenant Dameron said, and a cousin of Mr. Maggard's who was working at the guard shack at the coal mine that night, said that Mr. Maggard appeared at about 1 o'clock in the morning and asked to use the phone. He called Mrs. Fleming and asked her to bring him a change of clothes. Interviews with other witnesses testified to Lieutenant Dameron that Maggard and Mrs. Fleming, who had been briefly separated from her husband but had returned to live with him 2 months earlier, had discussed killing Mr. Fleming and making it look like an accident. Mr. Maggard, according to a witness, had bragged about the murder to other jail inmates. And co-workers at McDonald's, where Mrs. Fleming and Mr. Maggard both worked, said that they had been asked to provide the couple with alibis. So they both worked at McDonald's together, and this is probably how they became involved in this romance. And they asked the other people that worked at McDonald's, give us an alibi for this night. Lieutenant Dameron said that when Mrs. Fleming, when he told her about her husband's death, she didn't shed a tear. She seemed emotionless. Her body language was completely cold. So some people believe that she returned to the marriage 2 months earlier with the plan set in place. Instead of divorcing her husband and going off to be with this other man, the two of them came up with this plan where she would return home, reconcile with her husband. They would kill the husband and then get, I guess, with the intention of getting his life insurance. Most coal miners, most coal companies carry large life insurance policies. What some people might consider large, people from the coal communities and poorer communities like Letcher County would consider to be a sizable amount of money. That was probably why they came up with this plan to her to return home, reconcile, and then murder her husband. She would get the life insurance money. She would get the home. she would get her children and, draw a pension of Social Security from her husband for these two boys. Miss Fleming pleaded guilty in Letcher Circuit Court to complicity to commit capital murder with aggravated circumstances, complicity to commit first-degree arson, complicity to kidnapping, criminal complicity to tampering with evidence, and hindering prosecution. By pleading guilty, Mrs. Fleming agrees with the Commonwealth that states James Maggard beat Drad Fleming to death with a baseball bat outside the Flemings' home at Millstone and then placed him in his pickup truck. She says, now this is what the Commonwealth says that they believe happened, and she agreed to this. And she agreed to testify against James Maggard. That James Maggard beat Drad Fleming to death on June 20th, 2012 with a baseball bat outside of her home at Millstone. He then placed Mr. Fleming in his own truck, drove the truck to Frank's Creek, and set it on fire. Miss Fleming admits that she was present when the beating took place and that she did nothing to stop the beating. She did nothing to assist her husband. She did nothing to contact the police to say that Maggard had done this. And instead, she helped Maggard clean up the evidence. In my opinion, I don't even know why she was charged with complicity to commit murder. She should have been charged with first-degree murder. Because they planned this out. They had this planned. She wanted that life insurance money. She wanted this man to be her new man in her life and get rid of her husband and just fall right into place. The agreement also says that Miss Fleming knowingly allowed Maggard to take the pickup truck with her dead husband's body inside to a Black Mountain site where he set the truck on fire. Now, according to what the Commonwealth, the prosecutor says, was that Drad Fleming was still alive when they put him in the truck. They said that they had beaten him so badly at the house and then put him in the truck. And Maggard drove the truck to this site, set the truck on fire, and that was what caused the death of Mr. Fleming. Now, I'm going to hop in here with my own thoughts on that. The body was burned beyond recognition. There was no way to determine if it was even Drad Fleming's body until they were able to get DNA. She was complicit with it. She went along with it. She probably planned the whole thing out and stood by while this man beat her husband with a baseball bat and then waited for her role to clean it all up. The agreement states that Mrs. Fleming was aware of James Maggard and Austin Ison's plan to kill her husband before the crime was committed. Now, Letcher Circuit Judge Sam Wright approved the plea agreement. During her sentencing set for April the 16th, the mother of two will serve life terms on each of the charges of complicity to capital murder, complicity to arson, and kidnapping. She will also receive 5 years prison terms for complicity to tampering with physical evidence and hindering prosecution. The sentences will run concurrently. Although the Commonwealth said that Mrs. Fleming might get a chance to apply for release on parole after serving a total of 20 years, including the time she has already served, he believes it is highly unlikely that she will be granted parole or released from prison after a hearing before the state's parole board. The family can object and oppose every step of the way. It was always important to the family to know exactly how Drad died, said Banks. Investigators have maintained that Miss Fleming and Maggard began conspiring this murder of Drad Fleming after they became lovers while working at McDonalds in Whitesburg. Sources knowledgeable with the investigation have said that Miss Fleming masterminded the plan and convinced her husband to increase the amount of his life insurance policy 1 month before the murder. She swore in a statement to the Commonwealth prior to her sentencing and took this plea agreement. Authorities have said that Ison was not present at the time of the beating, but he helped Fleming and Maggard in planning the crime and told them how hot a fire would have to be in order to disintegrate a body. Now, according to them, they said that this man, this Ison, had been a student to become an undertaker or a mortuary student. Fleming and Maggard were charged in the case on the afternoon of June the 23rd, 2012. Maggard walked into the sheriff's office and admitted to his role in the slaying and led deputies to the crime scene on Black Mountain. She and Maggard ambushed him with the baseball bat, or Maggard did, while she was the one that lured him back home. And then once again, video surveillance taken from a coal mine near Little Fork of Franks Creek shows Drad Fleming's truck driving by the mine site at a high rate of speed at 10:15 p.m. that night. It also shows Maggard walking back down that same road 1 hour and 37 minutes later. Maggard's cousin was working that night at a nearby mine shack, guard shack, and said that he came by and asked to use the phone. He said not long after that, Mrs. Fleming showed up and gave Maggard a change of clean clothes. Now, I don't know what did the cousin know that this was going to happen? Because he's there at work. He's at this guard shack. He's working. Here comes his cousin from out of nowhere at 1 o'clock in the morning saying, I need to use your phone. Calls this Fleming right in front of him, this woman, and says, bring me a change of clothes and some cleaning supplies. She shows up not too long after that. He goes back into the guard shack, washes up, and changes his clothing inside the guard shack. And then he gets into the car with Miss Fleming, and the two of them leave together. Now, the cousin is standing there watching this. Is he thinking what's going on here? Or did he know? Now, as I was reading this about the cousin who worked at this guard shack at this coal mine, it was, I had this question, and I asked this question, what was running through his mind? He's there at work, and all of a sudden, from out of nowhere, here comes his first cousin walking in saying, I need to use your phone. Then he calls this girlfriend, this married woman, and says, come here and bring me some, clean clothes and stuff to clean up with. She arrives. This was about 20 miles from where she lives, so it had to have taken her a little time. What's he saying to his cousin while the two of them are standing around here waiting for her to show up? And then I start asking the question, well, did he know his cousin worked there ahead of time? He knew he would help him out. Did he really call this Stephanie Fleming and say, come pick me up? Or was she somewhere nearby waiting for that call? And did the cousin know anything? So as I was asking myself this, I found the answer to that. and this was from 2014. A fourth person has been indicted in connection with the June 2012 murder of Drad Fleming. Jonathan Maggard, this was the cousin, is charged with hindering prosecution in the latest round of indictments handed down by the Letcher County grand jury. The grand jury says Maggard gave assistance to confessed killers James Maggard and Stephanie Fleming, but Lieutenant Brian Dameron said he agreed to present the case to the grand jury at the urging of the family members of Drad Fleming. But I have to ask this question about Jonathan Maggard. Was he contacted ahead of time? Was his role in this more premeditated than they're saying? Was he there at this guard shack expecting his cousin to show up, knowing, and did he already have clothes and stuff there? And this other part of this whole story about him coming there and asking to use the phone was all just, made up. I don't know, but he also got indicted. And then Jonathan Maggard, I don't know if Jonathan Maggard came and turned himself in or came to talk to police, or if they went out to talk to him after James Maggard gave them this story. But he admitted to police that James Maggard came to his place of work at Hubble Mining, number 12, and went inside the guard shack and cleaned himself up and changed into clean clothing that Mrs. Fleming had brought to him. Now, this mine is located near where Drad Fleming's body was found. And Lieutenant Dameron said he believes, and the grand jury agreed, that Jonathan Maggard knew about the murder and chose not to report it. So either he was in on the premeditation and planning where they would take the body to get rid of it, because knowing that he would be there at work that night, knowing that they would have somebody to kind of help him out. And when it came out on the news the next day, and when everybody in the community was looking for this Drad Fleming, this Jonathan Maggard, had to ask himself, well, that was this guy's wife that was here at my job site with my cousin. So they believe he knew about it, and I do too. I think he knew about it. Mr. Maggard's mother, Shirley Maggard, said in an interview that her son was brought up better than that, and that he was also always a respectful person. Sitting in her small apartment in the Neon community watching TV, Mrs. Maggard said that her son's arrest had been very difficult on her. She was still recovering from the death of her husband from lung cancer a year earlier. It just doesn't seem real, she said. She said that some members of Mr. Fleming's family had contacted members of her family and said that they don't hold them responsible for what Mr. Maggard had done. They didn't want there to be this hatred and animosity between these families. I don't know if they knew each other prior to all this. Blamed the wife, Stephanie Fleming, and this Maggard for the death of they didn't blame the families. So now, to talk about Maggard, the man that was involved in this murder, his cousin said that in the year leading up to this, Mr. Maggard had divorced his wife. He was no longer a happy-go-lucky person. He wasn't the same guy that he had been. He began to lose weight. He seemed depressed all the time. And he said that the last time that he talked to him, he told him that he'd been chasing around after a married woman. His exact words, he said, were, "I've been chasing around this married woman and trying to chase down her husband." That was his exact words. But Lieutenant Dameron called the crime heinous and said that he suspected that the motive was money. Now here we go back to my theory. Mr. Fleming had 2 life insurance policies with double indemnity clauses for accidents. So they tried to make this look like an accident by rolling his truck over the hill, setting it on fire. She would have gotten double the amount of life insurance money. On the evening of his memorial service, more than 150 mourners gathered into the Millstone Missionary Baptist Church. Miners showed up in their work clothes to honor Mr. Fleming and his children. He had a 17-year-old daughter from his first marriage, was there with her family. And so see, when he was missing, his daughter, his 17-year-old daughter, and her mother, his ex-wife, they were with the family when they went to file this missing person report. But his current wife, Stephanie Fleming, the mother of his two little sons, she wasn't even with them. I don't know how the relationship was with her and his family, but they had been separated and had recently got back together, so there could have been some tension, there could have been some dislike. He was murdered by a woman who was having a relationship with a man whose own life was in disarray. He had just recently gotten divorced. He was going through some personal issues in his own life. She gets involved with this man and decides the best course of action is to murder her husband. "I hope justice is served," said Mr. Bentley, who was the president of the Miners' Union. "I worked in the mines with Mr. Fleming for 15 years, and he was just like a family member to me. You go into the coal mine every day and you worry about getting out alive, you worry about getting home to your family. And every day when you walk out of that mine, you feel fortunate to be alive. And then somebody comes along and does something like this." And I was able to find Austin Ison in the Kentucky Online Offender website. And he was released from jail and began probation in July of 2020. And his probation is due to end in July of this year. So he did serve some time in jail, and he was given 5 years probation and released in 2020. And that comes to an end here just in the next month or so. So he was given 5 years. He served his time. I don't know anything more about him since he's been released. I couldn't find anything. But as far as Jonathan Maggard, and honestly, common sense says he could have picked up, just like Austin Ison, like I said about Austin Ison, either one of them two could have picked up the phone the minute that they heard about this. If Jonathan Maggard knew anything ahead of time, he could have called the police. He could have called Drad Fleming. He could have called some of Drad Fleming's family and warned them. Here's what they're up to. Austin Ison could have as well, but Austin Ison later claimed that he thought the whole thing was just a joke. He said his story is that he overheard this Stephanie Fleming and James Maggard discussing murdering her husband. And he overheard this conversation, and because he had gone to school, to mortuary school, and had worked in a funeral home, he said he just kind of looked over his shoulder and said, started telling them how hot a body would have to be in order for it to burn incinerated and get rid of evidence. And he said that he said this with kind of a chuckle type tone, just like that he thought it was a joke, and he thought that they were just kidding around and joking, and he just kind of got in on the conversation. But the night before Drad Fleming's body was found, the police were called to Stephanie Fleming's house because of a noise complaint. When they arrived, they said that there was a loud party going on, and this Austin Ison was there. Well, now, he had been friends with Stephanie Fleming when the two of them had worked together at Pizza Hut. And this is how the two of them knew each other. And he said that he had no idea that they were actually going to carry this plot out. But when this man went missing, did he not remember this conversation that he claims was just this kind of something that he just laughed off? I personally believe, and I think most other people do too, that whether he was probably promised money. That's my theory. Now, this Ison, according to what I was able to find, was very shocked and surprised when they came and said to him, "You're going to be indicted. You're going to be charged in this," and put him on a suicide watch in the jail. An autopsy performed the day that his remains were found shows that Drad Fleming died of smoke inhalation. So that's okay. So he was still alive when they put his body in the truck and drove him out to this place, set him on fire, pushed the truck over the hill, set the truck on fire, pushed it over the hill, and he was still alive. But he dies from the smoke inhalation and from thermal injuries. And that the inside of his throat, his lungs, contained abundant amounts of soot. The autopsy report, State Medical Examiner Victoria Graham said that blunt force trauma cannot be excluded as a possible cause of death. But the fact that he had soot and smoke inside of his lungs says that he was breathing in air. James Ray Maggard, a Neon man accused of murdering Drad Fleming, entered an Alford plea in Letcher Circuit Court. By entering the Alford plea, he admits that there was sufficient evidence to try to persuade a jury to convict him, but he thought it was in his best interest to enter the plea. Maggard maintains that he is innocent of the murder, kidnapping, and arson charges, but admits that there was enough evidence that a jury could probably convict him and find him guilty of attacking Drad Fleming with a baseball bat and then setting him and his truck on fire at a remote location near Franks Creek. The plea agreement, which calls for Maggard to serve life in prison without the possibility of parole, was signed by Maggard and his attorneys. On March 5th, Drad Fleming's wife, who was the lover of James Maggard, also pleaded guilty to complicity to murder with aggravating circumstances. Now, I already talked about her case. In return for her guilty plea, she will serve a life sentence in prison. Investigators maintain that Miss Fleming and Maggard began to conspire to kill Drad Fleming months earlier when they became lovers while working together. I think this Austin Ison should have been charged with first-degree murder because, in my opinion, and I know the law works differently than people's opinions, but knowing months ahead of time that he could have put a stop to this by reaching out to the authorities and telling somebody they're planning this, they could have saved Drad Fleming's life and still given these two people prison sentences for their role in planning this murder. And he could have not been involved in it, but apparently he wanted to be involved in it in some way, probably because they were planning to they were promising to give him money from this big life insurance policy that she thought she was going to get. "We believe justice has been served," said Edison Banks, who was the attorney, the prosecutor. After Maggard appeared in court, Banks said that he will serve life in prison without the possibility of probation or parole. Now, in a related story, Letcher Circuit Court, this is dated 2020. Letcher Circuit Court was scheduled to hear a motion on whether to let convicted murderer Stephanie Yvonne Fleming out of prison because of the dangers of COVID-19. She is now asking that her sentence be suspended and that she be placed on probation, home incarceration, or some other release. I couldn't find anything saying that she was, but I know that she is currently in jail according to Kentucky.gov. This is from Kentucky Online Offender Lookup. She is serving her sentence at the Kentucky Correctional Institution for Women, and she was incarcerated in March of 2016 on a life sentence. Her possible eligibility for parole is June of 2032. This is just a very sad story. It's a shock. It's shocking, but then again, you know, we're going to talk a little bit here about this Lieutenant Brian Dameron, and I'm going to get into his story. This whole thing turned out to be this maze. What started out at the story of this married woman having this affair, concocting this plan to murder her husband, and then it leads to these other arrests and stuff that was going on with these other people. So as I've mentioned several times, the name Lieutenant Brian Dameron has come up in this story, and I want to make everyone aware that he himself got into some trouble. This is from the Mountain Eagle, and this was dated in 2015. Former Letcher County Sheriff's Deputy Brian Dameron will serve 5 years in prison with no chance for parole or probation under a plea agreement. Dameron, who was second in command at the Letcher County Sheriff's Office, pleaded guilty to 6 counts of receiving stolen property and 1 count of theft by unlawful taking, and a 7th charge of receiving stolen property was dismissed. Dameron, who was ordered taken into custody at the end of the hearing, will be housed in the Harlan County Jail. This week's plea agreement was reached between Dameron and his attorney and the Commonwealth attorney, Rick Bartley. Bartley, who was assigned to the case by Edison Banks II after he stepped aside, said he will oppose all probation or early parole. And Dameron answered yes 6 times on each count, 7 times. 1 count was dropped. In pleading guilty to the charges, Dameron admitted to illegally possessing and disposing of 4 Glock handguns and some other guns and some other evidence that turned up missing from an evidence locker in the sheriff's office. He also admitted to illegally possessing and disposing of an AR-15 rifle and some other scopes and things with these rifles, and $500 in cash, which went missing from the evidence locker. According to the indictment, the crimes all took place between November the 29th, 2012 and sometime in 2014. The indictment was returned after the grand jury heard testimony from then Sheriff Danny Webb and Deputy Sheriff Barry Engel following an in-house investigation. He had served 8 years in the Marine Corps and had done everything that the court had asked of him since his indictment was returned. Prosecutor Rick Bartley argued that the charges to which Dameron pleaded were very serious and that he should be taken straight into custody. He believed that he was a flight risk. So as I'm reading this story and I'm gathering all this information about Drad Fleming's murder, Lieutenant Brian Dameron's name comes up quite a bit because he was the one investigating this. So Danny Webb, who was the sheriff at that time, began an investigation into Dameron after a large sum of money and many guns and other items were taken or went missing from the evidence locker. Former Letcher County Deputy Sheriff Brian Dameron was released from prison. Now, this was July of 2016. So he had only served 1 year of his 5-year prison sentence. The decision was made by the Kentucky Parole Board, which approved his early release. And he must be on parole until January of 2019. So that's been quite some time ago, and I don't know what's become of him since then. As for Jonathan Maggard, he was given a pretrial diversion. He was given a form of probation where he had to testify, and all of his statements had to be truthful according to his testimony that he had given to the police when he was first interviewed. And he had to remain drug and alcohol free during this diversion program. It was a form of probation. He served 5 years on this program. And as far as I could find about him, I couldn't really find anything about him after all of this. But he didn't serve any jail time in relation to this because he agreed to testify. As for Stephanie Fleming and James Maggard, their ill-fated romance that started in the hot, steamy kitchen of McDonald's, where the two of them started this romance, ill-fated love affair that she thought was going to bring her money from her husband's double life insurance policies. She thought she was going to have this lifestyle where no one was going to... Did she ever stop and think about the possibility of being caught, or about the possibility of them turning on each other? These other people involved in this, the way she was behaving during the time when he first went missing. He leaves his house that day to go to his uncle's funeral. His stepfather sees him in the parking lot and says, tells him where there's some parking spots. Before he gets a chance to park his truck and get out and go into the church, she contacts him on the cell phone, says, come back home. He goes back home, and that's when he's ambushed and beaten to death by James Maggard and Stephanie Fleming. Where were the children at the time? She had this little 2-year-old and 3-year-old little boys. She stands by watching as her husband's being beaten. What was put into the mind, and I'm not giving this James Maggard a pass. I'm not saying that he wasn't guilty and that he didn't deserve to be, imprisoned for killing this man. But what was he hearing about Drad Fleming? Was she telling him that Drad Fleming was abusive to her? Was she telling him that Drad Fleming was going to divorce her and take her sons away? What led James Maggard, other than the enticement of money? Because he had told his cousin, he had told someone earlier that he had been chasing after this woman and trying to chase down her husband. What did he mean by that? Trying to chase down her husband. Was this whole thing his idea? I don't know, but it's just, it's horrible that this man lost his life in such a brutal way. And the two of them ended up with no money. She is in prison. They're both in prison. And what will happen to her young children were raised by their grandmother. And they grew up without either parent. And it's just, to wrap this story up. And as I said when I started this video, and I know this was a long one, but I didn't want to leave out all these different details about this story. And I tried to gather as much as I could about each one of these people. And I'm sure there's quite a bit of stuff that I have overlooked and couldn't find. But to wrap this story up, I'll just say that both of them are still sitting in jail. Austin Ison served his time and he's out. The enticement, whatever it is that's going on in Letcher County, and it's not just Letcher County. I don't want to give all of Letcher County a bad name. Letcher County is a very beautiful place. It's in the mountains. There's just, it's just a nice place to visit, and for the most part, the people there are kind and easy to get along with, but there is corruption afoot. And so I am working on a video, and I'm working on a story about the corruption, some of the corruption going on in Letcher County that goes back. And I will have to include this story about Brian Dameron in with that. But I appreciate everyone's time. And like I said, I know this video ran a little bit long. Thanks for watching.